Hey everybody, welcome back to my Stonks on Rails series where I'm working on a small application called Stonk Notes. In this episode, I'm going to be upgrading my application from Rails version 6.1 to version 7, and you're going to see whatever troubles I run into in doing that upgrade. One of the major features that are introduced in Rails 7 is a new way of handling JavaScript on the front end called import maps. And in the middle of the video, I find a reason that import maps may not be a good or practical solution for most Rails apps out there. So be sure to watch the whole video because I'm going to show you a workaround for that too. The biggest change in Rails 7 is the way that it handles JavaScript on the front end. While previous versions of Rails relied on the Webpacker gem to compile all of the JavaScript into a minified file, Rails 7 eliminates Webpacker completely and replaces it with a feature called Importmaps, which works quite differently. If you're running an API-only application with a completely isolated JavaScript front end, as many React or Vue projects are now, I don't think upgrading to Rails 7 is going to be as painful for you. This application that I'm working on, however, makes use of a Rails-generated front end and the Hotwire framework. So we're going to get a little taste of what it's like to upgrade to Rails 7 if you already have a front end and you're using some JavaScript. So I'm going to start this upgrade process by going to the Rails Guides website and going to the version 7 release notes to see what the major features are that have changed. And I've already skimmed through this and I didn't see anything that I think would directly affect the program that I'm trying to upgrade. But if I get any weird errors and something's not working right, I could probably come here for reference and get an idea of exactly what changed. Now, this article here, Upgrade Ruby on Rails, is more comprehensive on the upgrade process itself and kind of walks you through the steps that you need to do to upgrade your Rails 6.1 application to Rails 7. And we're going to follow this first general advice outline here. And 1.1 test coverage, well, I don't have any test coverage in this app, so we're just going to wing it. And for upgrading between versions of Rails, your old application, there's an update task. It's basically a rake task that you run, and it goes through a generator that will go through all the diffs between your application configuration files and the new ones introduced in Rails 7. Another website that I find to be really useful in getting a good overview of what you're going to be dealing with and upgrading from versions of Rails is the railsdiff.org website. So here we could go to 6.1 and we're going to try upgrading to the latest Rails, which is version 7.0.2.2, and we could view the diff. And this will show you everything that's different in a plain brand new Rails application. And this is a pretty good guide for going through this if you want to do your upgrade manually. So since we're going to first start out with the gem file change for the Rails version, I'm going to use Rails diff to take a look at what changed between the Rails versions in the gem file. So the first thing that we're going to do is upgrade the Rails gem version. Sprockets is optional now, but it looks like they're still including it by default. Puma version 5, which is the same. Turbo Rails gem is included. Turbo Stimulus Rails is included. Okay, so not too much has changed that I think would affect this application. Let's take a look at what we've got here in the current gem file for this project. So we're going to change this to 7.02, and then I think we just do bundle install, and that should work fine, I believe. Whoops, it looks like instead of a bundle install, we should do a bundle update Rails. Now we could run the update task, a Rails app update. And here we get an error. It looks like Bootsnap, which is a loading efficiency tool, doesn't like something. So let's take a look at that. The only thing that seems to really changed here is the version number, so let's do a bundle update on that. I'll go ahead and remove the versioning on the gem file to match what the railsdiff.org tells us is in the new Rails 7 gem file, and then I'll go ahead and run bundle update. So that seems to have worked. Let's go ahead and try to run the app update again. Well, what exactly is changing in the boot RB? Let's take a look. Now they just changed the quotes here. Huh. I didn't touch that file. So now this could be problematic here because it wants to completely overwrite the development.rb file when I might have some custom changes in there. So I'm going to open up the file and take a quick look just to see if there are any new commits that I added. And it doesn't look like I really added anything to the file since it was created, so that's probably why it wants to do the overwrite. So I'm going to fast forward this video a little bit, and here when I get to application.rb, I'm not exactly sure what happened here and what this error means, so I'm going to take a look at the file. It looks like the updater did try to make a change. I really like it that IntelliJ gives me this insight into the Git diffs right there on the sidebar, so I could see that I had some other code there in that spot, and I could just kind of roll back the unintended change that the Rails updater did. So I'm also just going to go ahead and check the Rails diff to see if there's anything in this application.rb file that's missing, and as you can see here, the Rails defaults went from 6.1 to 7, so I'm going to make that adjustment as well to this file. And if you notice here, there's a few active record migrations that it added for the database. And if we go in and look at the file, this is related to the active storage feature of Rails, which I find kind of strange because according to the docs, there haven't been any updates to active storage in the release notes. So let's go ahead and run those migrations and see what happens. And it looks like there's an error. It can't find those tables that's trying to modify, and that's because I'm not really using the active storage feature in this application and I haven't set it up, so those tables don't exist. In that case, I think it's best if I just go ahead and delete those migrations for now. So now that we got this app upgraded to Rails 7, I'd say it's a good time to go ahead and run the Rails server, and we could go ahead and see if our application still runs, if there's any problems. I don't have tests, so I'm just going to be manually running some of the features and see if there's any hiccups, if the JavaScript still works. And it looks like it's still able to add new stonk notes. We still got that JavaScript working. But the problem that we have now is that we're still using Webpacker, because although we upgraded to Rails 7, we haven't really changed anything in the way that our JavaScript is set up. It's still compiling through the Webpacker application. If we want to use the latest feature in Rails 7, we're going to have to use Importmaps. So let's go ahead and install the Importmaps feature and convert this application to a proper Rails 7 app. So I'm going to start this off just by following this installation guide here in the Importmaps GitHub article, the README file. And we're going to start off by installing Importmap-rails, the gem. And then we'll do our standard bundle install. And then we're going to go ahead and run the rake task Rails import map install. And that's going to generate some files for our application here. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the important files that were dropped into our project. It gave us an application.js file where we're going to do our ES6 style imports and general setup of our JavaScript, similar to what we were doing when we had our Webpacker set up. And there's also a file called config manifest.js, and this is used by Sprockets. And something I find interesting about this is that even though the Rails guides say that Sprockets is an optional dependency now, it sure does seem to be quite a bit integrated into your default Rails setup. And as you'll see later, it's integrated into the ES6 bundler system as well. And finally, there's the importmap.rb file, and that's where you're going to use the pin commands to install JavaScript libraries, kind of like your gem file, and that's going to be kind of your stand-in for the package.json file that you typically have in a yarn or an npm setup. I'm going to test this out now by adding a little alert here that says hello world from Importmaps to the application.js file, which should be loaded when we open up a new web page. And we're also going to have to modify our application layout template by getting rid of our Webpacker tags and replacing it with a JavaScript import map tag. All right, hello world from Importmaps. Great. Now, the problem is that our styles are no longer loading, so let's go try to fix that. Also, our JavaScript is broken right now. So let's go ahead and try to add Bootstrap to our project by using the bin import map add command, which works very similarly to yarn add or npm. And with this command, you could reference just about any module that's on the Node package manager library. So like here with Bootstrap, it pulled it down from here from the repository. We could also specify a version number if we want to by like doing 5.1 version, and then it'll go and grab that particular version from the repo. Now if we go back to our importmap.rb file, we'll see that Bootstrap has been added with pin bootstrap and popper.js core, and they're set to download those particular JavaScript files directly from the CDN. And if you don't really like this methodology of grabbing your dependencies in JavaScript, you could also download these directly too into the project by specifying download in the pin command. Let me show you. So as you can see here, the references have changed to local installations, and those are stored here in vendor JavaScript. So now we got a new problem, and that's this application.js file can't load style sheets the way we were doing with Webpacker. And that's because this is not compiled. It just gets served to the web browser. Unfortunately, that's one of the limitations of this system of import maps. We could download the JavaScript part of Bootstrap, but we won't have the CSS files, which is what the core Bootstrap is about. Because there's no compiler or transpiler, you can't use style sheets. You also can't use JSX if you're doing React, and you can't use TypeScript. So we're going to have to use a different approach, and that's where ESBuild comes in. So if you're creating a new Rails app, there's an option here, -J or JavaScript, where you can choose the JavaScript bundling tool that you want to use. When you're setting up a new Rails application now, you have several choices of how you're going to handle JavaScript and bundle them into a file. You could do the import map, which doesn't really do any bundling. It just calls in the raw ES6 JavaScript files from CDNs, but you could still use Webpack, or you could use one of the newer, faster libraries like ESBuild or Rollup. Unfortunately, the Rails diff website doesn't give you settings that allow you to diff for these different options set up when you're making a new Rails application. So what we could do is we could instead set up a new Rails app on our local system, do one for the import maps, which is the default, and then also set up an ESBuild one, and then do a diff between the branches to see what Rails does differently, and then we'll convert our import map application to use ESBuild based on what we see as a difference between those two diffs. Here now looking at the diffs between the two branches, one of them is import maps and the other one uses ESBuild. The main difference is that they use a different gem. ESBuild makes use of a gem called jsbundling-rails, which does the ESBundle interface. So let's go ahead and try to configure our application to use jsbundling-rails, and then we'll set it up for ESBuild. And then hopefully we could figure out how to package in our style sheets and other types of things that we might want to transpile that are JavaScript. I'm going to follow the setup guide here for the jsbundling-rails gem. There's a lot of important detail here that's easy to miss, so pay attention. First of all, I want to explain to you how this works. Whatever is in your app JavaScript folder is going to be compiled by ESBuild. So you have this application.js file here. ESBuild is going to compile that, put it into builds, assets builds, and then you have your compiled application.js, which is going to be plain JavaScript, and then that's going to be served up by the Rails asset pipeline, and it's going to be dropped here into your public folder and served as a plain JavaScript file with your application by Rails. So the Rails asset pipeline, also known as Sprockets, is still quite tightly integrated into Rails, and we need it for this type of setup. And by the way, in order for this process to work automatically while you're in development mode, you need to have a JavaScript watch thread that's going to be checking for new changes to your code that you're writing and automatically initiate the compiler. You can do that by running yarn watch in a separate window, or you could run your Rails server by the new bin dev script that they give you when you install JSBundling. So let's go ahead and switch this application from using Importmap-rails to jsbundling-rails by first getting rid of this gem. Okay, bundle's been installed. Now we could run the rake task. So that installed our ESBuild related files, and as you can see, it also added yarn, and we've got our node modules again. Now this line right here is a very important message. Add to your script section in your package.json the build task, and that'll tell it how to build your JavaScript files. So let's go ahead and do that. Now this application.js file is no longer going to use import maps. It's going to be using ESBuild. And we could import our bootstrap JavaScript files by using the ES6 import command. And next I'm going to take my styles that I was using here. And so one thing that we're going to do differently than we were doing with Webpacker is I'm actually going to use the asset pipeline to serve the CSS part of Bootstrap and all of my styles. Whereas before we were importing the styles into the JavaScript. As you can see here, this is our old application JavaScript thing, pack.styles. We were importing them here, but we're not going to use JavaScript because that would take some additional configuration to do with ESBuild that I don't want to mess with right now. And since all of this has to go through the asset pipeline anyway, we might as well just use the asset pipeline to build our style sheets. But the nice advantage that we have now is that we could manage Bootstrap as a package through Node Package Manager and Yarn, whereas before we didn't have a way to do that if we were just using import maps. I'm just here going to copy my CSS or SCSS styling from that JavaScript folder, JavaScript styles, over to app asset style sheets and make use of the SCSS files that are going to be processed by Sprockets. And an important detail here is that we don't need this tilde here to reference the node modules. We could just do that to call in our Bootstrap SCSS. And we've also got to go back to using the style sheet link tag, which is how you access the asset pipeline version of the style sheets. And we're not using import maps anymore, so we're going to change that to JavaScript include tag to reference the asset pipeline. So I'm going to go and restart my Rails server here, but instead of doing Rails server, I'm going to use bin dev, which also creates the file watcher for compiling to JavaScript. Okay, looks like we got a warning here about Popper.js core. I think it has to do with whether it's being used or not. It's just a warning. Let's go ahead and see if Bootstrap loaded the styles into our application now. Oh, and there's one more thing I noticed. So it's not using the custom port that I wanted to use, because if we look here at the bin dev script, this actually starts a process manager called foreman, and that makes use of a process file.dev. Let's look what's there. It automatically runs a Rails server at port 3000. We don't want that. We want to use the custom port on the environment variable that I'm using. So let's go do that again. I can't find Bootstrap SCSS. And that's because we forgot to do one more step. We've got to go to this asset pipeline initializer file, and we need to tell it to add the node modules directory to the asset pipeline in Sprockets. So let's give this another try. It looks like there's an issue with my CSS. Might be because I'm using a more updated version of the Bootstrap library now. This was a fix for something I was doing. Okay, there we go. We reloaded. Hello from ESBuild. And as you can see, there was a good hot reload there. But now we have a problem with our stimulus and turbo being broken, because we need to import those now into ESBuild. And to do that, pretty much all we have to do is take what we need from our Webpacker packs application and transfer that into the JavaScript application. So I'm going to take this import statement for the controllers, move it here, and I'm also going to add a reference to Hotwire Turbo Rails to import that as well. Okay, controllers is referenced like this, and this goes to our stimulus controllers. Now, another change that we have to make is that this require context doesn't work anymore with ESBuild, so we're going to have to change the way that these are referenced. Unfortunately, to rewrite this, we're going to have to, instead of having a shortcut to reference all of the controllers in the directory, we're going to have to import them one by one using this type of syntax here, where we do import the controller name and then register it with stimulus. So basically, after application.start, we're going to rewrite that like this. And that should get our controllers working. Let's see if our JavaScript works on the page. Reload. And our JavaScript is still not working. Oh, I misspelled hotwired. Okay, so that should have hot reloaded. Looks like it did. Now we can refresh the page. There we go. Now our automatic load of infinite scroll is working. New note. And all of our JavaScript is working as it used to. That was pretty simple. And finally, I'm going to get rid of these old files I don't need. We could get rid of the packs. We can get rid of the styles because that's being used by the asset pipeline now from the assets directory. I want to clean up what we downloaded here into vendor JavaScript. And we can get rid of this import map config file because we're not using import maps, we're using ESBuild. Well, that kind of wraps up how to get at least this application running on Rails 7 using ESBuild. And we're still continuing to use our full JavaScript library, including Hotwire. I hope you found this informational and useful to you. If you did, give this video a like and subscribe to my channel because I have a lot more content like this planned. So I'll see you in the next video.